So this is going to be recorded. Just don't. If any embarrassing questions, you can save them for later or something. We can edit it out afterwards. But you can also find all the classes online. I don't think you have one of these. I think so. You were here once before? Yes, you have it right. Do you need the syllabus thing? Is you want your own copy?
Sure.
Okay, so to remind you, that the way these classes work, there's no beginning, there's no end. So if it's your first time, we sort of jump in the middle, which is a little bit confusing, but if you stick with it long enough, it will begin to make sense, right? Because if we required everyone to start at the same time and go through in order, then it would just be much less flexible. So people drop into the class, they drop out of the class, they come whenever they can, for as long as it's compelling for them. And so I think we're now up to Roman numeral 4, letter I. Does that sound, on the comparison page, does that sound right? I think that's where we're at. Okay. So we've been studying for a few weeks now. A few sessions have been dealing with kosher food and keeping kosher, and now letter I addresses some areas of difficulty. So the first area of difficulty is a sink. Let's sort of think through what could be challenging about a sink. Let's sort of talk this through, and we'll come up with some solutions. Right? A sink. Right? So what's the issue? Right? What might be an issue with a sink? Sinks are great. What's
Mixing plates.
Yeah.
mixing plates? What kind of plates? Like
Meat and dairy.
meat and dairy. Right. So I worked for a year as an intern at a synagogue in Texas, where they have very, very large homes. And in Texas, everyone just has 2 kitchens, and kitchens like twice the size of this bit in Josh. And somebody actually said to my wife, like, how can you keep kosher if you only have 1 sink? Because that's just how they live there. Okay, but now they're all underwater, so it doesn't anyway. But shows that you can keep kosher with 1 sink, but you just have to be careful about your dairy and meat foods and plates and stuff mixing, right? Because we keep dairy and meat separate, and you want to, if you're using the same sink. So you can use the same sink for both. You have to make sure that they don't. Dairy doesn't contaminate meat. Meat doesn't contaminate dairy. The way that this is commonly done. And you could have 2 sinks. 2 sinks are great. If you have to have 2 sinks, it's very easy. 1 is for dairy and 1 is for meat, and then you can you can relax that way. If you don't have 2 sinks, what you can do is have like a sink liner, like a metal rack. Usually you can get them at Bed Bath & Beyond. There's sort of like a little wire rack covered in rubber. It sits on the inside of your sink, and it keeps everything just an inch or 2 above the bottom of the floor of the sink. And what does that do? So let's say you have 1 for meat, you have 1 for dairy. That means that your dishes, as they're sitting in your sink, waiting for you to wash them, or as you're washing them, you rest them. You're not resting them on the sink itself, you're resting them on a grating, which is only used for meat or only used for dairy dishes. So any dairy foods that gets on food residue on the plate, as it's being washed, let's say even with very, very hot water, in your sink, it's only going to be touching that dairy grating. That dairy grating can absorb dairy taste, and that's fine. And when you're ready to wash your meat dishes, you empty the sink, take it out, you put your meat grate in, and you wash your meat dishes. If you have neutral dishes, part of things, you can wash them with either sink inserts. You really need 2. Okay? You need 2. You can't just the sink itself, though, then really is since you're washing dairy and meat things in the sink, really isn't so kosher. So you shouldn't rest things directly on the sink itself. We saw last session, if you remember, we said that if you make a mistake while washing dishes, it's almost never going to be a problem because of 2 reasons. One is, if you're washing dishes by hand, the water's not going to be sufficiently hot to cause the taste to contaminate, to be transferred, right? Because things have to be piping hot, so hot that you can't hold on to them with your hands, or for taste to transfer, for the meat taste to be absorbed into whatever. And if you wash the dishes by hand, your hands are there, like by definition it's not that hot, although maybe if you don't have the safety thing turned on in your hot water boiler and you're holding the dish by the side and it really is too hot for you to get your hand in it, so you're using gloves, you're holding from the side, then it couldn't really be that hot. But if you're using soap, that's going to also be a mitigating factor because soap has a rancid, unpleasant taste, and the soap is mixed in with the meat taste or the dairy taste, and so the taste that might potentially be absorbed and transferred is a rancid, unpleasant taste because it's mixed in with soap, and so it's also not going to. So accident, oh my gosh, this is a meat fork. What are you doing putting it in? It's fine. You washed it with soap. You washed it by hand. It's not going to be an issue. Those are sinks. Any questions about sinks?
Is it only the relevant surface area off of which you would eat that matters? So if you cross-contaminate the bottom of a plate, does that taint the whole plate even though you don't
Yeah, it's a good question. Do you understand the question, right? If basically it depends, but generally it doesn't really matter where the contamination takes place because we're concerned that the taste kind of like, we always want to assume the worst possible scenario, which would be that the taste fully permeates the interior of the object or whatever it is, and so it really could be anywhere. Under certain circumstances, we know that hasn't happened, and maybe you could just think of the temperature. We might just, if you remove like an outer edge or something, then that would be, like if you use a non-kosher knife to cut kosher fish, like you're at the fish, you're at Whole Foods and they have salmon, and use a non-kosher knife to cut into pieces. So you just rinse off the surfaces of the fish in cold water, right? Because there's no heat when the fish was cut with a non-kosher knife, but there might have been some residue from the crabs, whatever they were cutting right before, on the knife, and so the fish should be rinsed off before you cook it under cold water, and that just gets rid of all that, right? Because because it's not hot, we're not worried about anything permeating the fish. We just want to make sure that the outer surface is clean. Okay.
Are there some
Yes.
sink surfaces when the sink would be kosher?
I mean, if you only were to use it for meat, if you would never put dairy into your sink, then I guess so. But right, that seems. And the advantage of that, you wouldn't have to worry about a liner, and you could let things soak in the sink in super hot water. That it's rare that you would, right? There was a scare a few years ago. A kosher agency issued a very strict report about Starbucks, and they were worried that they're encouraging people not to drink Starbucks coffee because they served, let's say, ham sandwiches there, and they were worried that the coffee-making utensils might be washed in the same sink with let's say the tongs they use for touching the ham sandwiches. So I went to the Starbucks, I spoke to the manager, and she showed me how they clean things. And so first of all the coffee equipment is washed separately in special coffee equipment soap that they have patented, special soap just for washing coffee. So but maybe they use a thing to whip the cappuccino. I don't know, there might be something that, a spoon they use for stirring the cappuccino, which they're dipping into piping hot cappuccino, and maybe that spoon was washed together with the tongs for the ham sandwich, in the same, a way that could contaminate it, so that could be a concern. But what she showed me was that they have a sink where they soak things before washing, and they put them in the sink, and they put piping hot water, so maybe there could be, contaminant, except it's not piping hot water. They have a special spigot for the sink in which a proprietary blend of soap and water at a precise ratio comes out of the faucet. So because they don't want to waste soap and they don't want to have too little soap, so it's like the sink puts out soapy water. It's pretty cool, right? Very efficient. I mean, that's Starbucks, and that can leave it to a barista to determine how much soap to put in. But that means that there's never a possibility of piping hot of any object being soaked in a sink in piping hot water together with something that can contaminate it. Because if it's soaking in there, it's with soapy water. So I based on that, I continued to. I actually contacted the kosher agency, and they said they were going to revise this. They said. I was one of the first person to contact them, and they were revising the report, they were moderated it somewhat, and I went back to drinking Starbucks coffee. Izzy, yeah.
So I'm confused because on the one hand we are learning 1 in 60 is already
Correct. Nullified, yes.
Nullified, and then you're saying just there's a hint of some meat into some milkshake stuff, then you really have to worry about. So
160 is, if you have 160, that's also a reason not to be concerned, but you might not have 160 if the thing is still, you might not have 160 if you're doing dishes and you, the tongs are not, let's say, I use my tongs for a spatula for ham sandwich that I'm frying on the panini thing, that's right. So there isn't 60 times, the spatula isn't 60 times the volume of the piece of ham in the sandwich, right? So the spatula then becomes, right? And so if we say the entire spatula, then you need 60 times the volume of the spatula, which you're not going to have, and right, so. That's a good point. That's called, in Hebrew, that's called chaticha naset nevela. That the entire contaminated thing itself becomes something not kosher. And so instead of eating 60 times the original piece of non-kosher, you eat 60 times the thing it fell upon, and then, which ends up requires a much stricter scenario. This is actually divided between Ashkenazi and Sephardic halacha. A different time, we can go into that. And that's what sinks, we could talk about sinks all day. Anything about sinks? Okay. Microwaves are so interesting. Microwaves are really interesting because they work without heat. Okay? That's why you can cook something in a microwave or heat something in a microwave and the plate isn't hot or the walls of the microwave aren't hot, because there's no source of heat in the microwave oven. That it's, I guess, microwaves that go into the food and they excite the liquid molecules in the food and they get agitated, and that kinetic energy, that agitation of the molecules makes heat. So the heat doesn't come from anything. It just, microwaves don't have any heat. They just hit the food and then the food becomes hot as the microwaves get absorbed into the food. So that's pretty cool. So does that count as cooking for Jewish law? There's a prohibition against cooking dairy meat together. If you microwave dairy meat together, have you violated this biblical violation of cooking? Maybe not, right? Cooking usually is using heat to transform something. Microwave, there's no heat. There's a prohibition on Shabbat against cooking, right? You can't use heat to transform any object on Shabbat. So if you cook in a microwave, have you violated the biblical definition of cooking on Shabbat? Maybe not. Okay? So it's interesting. It's like a very interesting kind of, it doesn't meet the definitions of cooking in classic halacha. And here we're talking about taste being transferred. So what is it that transfers taste? It's heat. The microwave, there's no heat. There is, however, some heat because you have steam rising from the food, and sometimes you have like splattering specks of the food. It gets all, which get sprayed in the inside of the microwave. So what we do with microwaves is we use them for one gender uncovered and the second gender covered, right? So our microwave, dairy things or part of things we put in the neutral things we put in the microwave uncovered. Anything meat in the microwave gets a cover, so that there will be no splattering of meat into the walls of the microwave. That's what we do with microwaves.
So with technology, as things continue to come out,
Yeah.
there's just potentials that there's no issues with some of that.
Yeah, or more. Yeah, I mean, it depends on the technology. With something, right? I mean, you have, for example, the cutting edge area of Jewish law. As far as people have written about, but I don't believe the definitive, Jewish law analysis has yet been written on cultured meat. Have you heard about that? Right? You take it's like test tube meat, or you take meat stem cells and you grow like a steak in a laboratory. You get. So what is the status of that meat? Does it have this right? Do you take it from a kosher animal? Does it maybe it doesn't have to be kosher? Maybe it doesn't need shchita, it doesn't need to be slaughtered because it's never alive. It's just meat growing in a mesh or something in a laboratory. Can you eat that with dairy? Maybe. Does it have the status of meat? So maybe not. Who knows? Maybe right? Or maybe it's forbidden. Maybe it's Eri Menachai. If the cow that donated the stem cell line is still alive, maybe the whole thing is forbidden because of the biblical prohibition against eating a part of a living animal. So this is a huge open area of Jewish law, and it's sort of waiting for someone to make an argument. I think every area of Jewish law you have these new technology, new social scenarios, create new circumstances, and that's why there's ongoing scholarship, right, for some of these questions.
Is there a difference if, say, you start from a stem cell from a living organism, or what about if I, as a chemist, put in the molecules one by one and I create exactly that identical
Yeah,
cell?
so I don't think anyone has yet created life, from molecules in a.
One is working on that.
Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know because I don't know because I haven't read about this. I don't know because nobody knows. It hasn't been This is a cutting edge area of Jewish law. People are kind of positing various ideas. There still isn't commercial cultured meat. Once it becomes commercially available and people start eating it and consuming it, so the kosher agencies will have to decide, and they'll consult with whomever they consult, and they'll read the available literature and they'll come to some decision. Okay. Guests and housekeepers. So, if you're, new to keeping a kosher home, so it can be, you're also new to letting other people in your life know that your home is kosher, and that means having conversations with people who come to the trail. Like, yes, somebody says to me, your college roommate comes to visit you. So listen, I keep kosher now. You can't bring your whatever into my house, or you can't, or they can bring their sandwich from Subway into their home. They just keep it in the fridge, wrapped up, and they eat it on paper plates, not using your dishes. Just people in general are very respectful. You just have to be forthright about it and just open most potentially sticky situations in life if you are just straightforward and open about what your needs are and why, and what, people are very accommodating and respectful. You just have to explain. If somebody messes up, don't freak out. Oh no, I get all the time, I get texts and emails about, so-and-so was visiting, a friend was visiting my house and she accidentally took the wrong knife to use to spread the butter on the toast, or the housekeeper was eating, reheated her lunch in our oven, and now what do these things have solutions, and we work through them, and if it happens in your life, call me or text, and we'll figure it out. But just proactive and just explaining. In terms of people who are, if you have somebody who's going to be doing a lot, let's say a relative who's going to be staying for several days, or a housekeeper who comes every week, and part of what she does or he does is dishes or whatever, so give them a tour of your kitchen. This is the dairy dishes, these are the meat dishes, this is how, and just like there are Jewish people for whom it's very intuitive and they, learn how to keep kosher very easily, and sometimes it's a little bit harder, so too with non-Jewish people who are working or visiting guests in our homes, sometimes it's very easy, sometimes it's harder. In terms of people we've had in our, just thinking about babysitters or housekeepers or people in our life, since we started, I guess, hiring people to work in our homes, babysitters and stuff, since we were parents, some of them, they just pick it up really easily, and they get it, and they learn their way around our kitchen, and which are the dairy forks, which are the meat forks, and they get it, and some of them it's a little bit harder. The ones who've stayed with us for longer, they tend to be the ones who get it, they're a little sharper, or they're able to pick it up easier. But people are respectful. People want to respect your guidance for your kitchen. Everybody, you're not certainly keeping kosher is not the weirdest thing they've ever had to account. If they're a housekeeper or a babysitter, there've been much weirder things they've encountered in their line of work than somebody keeps kosher, right? I mean, it's not like a level 6 vegan macrobiotic, whatever they might, in their last job, right? You just keep your dairy and meat separate, that's fine. Okay. Any other questions about that? Should we go on? Letter J.
You skipped dishwasher.
I said dishwasher. Oh, I said dishwashers. Dishwashers, thank you. Dishwashers, very interesting. The Shulchan Aruch, the 16th century Jewish law code, says that since soap prevents taste from being absorbed, you can have a big vat of boiling water and put your dairy and your meat dishes in it at the same time to wash them with soap, and it's all fine because the soap is there mixing in with everything, and it all gets washed together and it's fine. So that sounds an awful lot like a dishwasher. Based on that, you should think you can put anything in a dishwasher together, as long as there's soap, it all gets washed, no kashrut contamination. And certainly that's true after the fact. If you accidentally put the wrong thing in the dishwasher, as long as there was soap, it's not going to be a problem. However, the practice is to be a little bit more careful and to have the dishwasher for dairy and the dishwasher for meat. Typically, you designate the dishwasher for one or the other, and you kasher it. You kind of neutralize it in between if you would want to switch from dairy to meat. So we use our dishwasher for dairy because we generally don't eat too much meat during the week. Then you can keep the dishwasher meat. If you have two dishwashers, then that's even easier. But again, because there's soap in the system, if you accidentally put the wrong thing in your dishwasher, it's really not going to be a problem. And in terms of, but why then would you even not do that? Oh yeah, well, let's say you have a spray of piping hot water from the dishwasher that hits against a piece of meat before it touches soap. And it pushes that piece of meat against the dishwasher racks, and the racks would absorb meat taste.
What if you pour soap on your dishwasher before?
So I do that. I spill a little soap outside the little container so that from the very beginning of the cycle there's soap in there. That doesn't mean that the soap going to spread instantly to every corner of the dishwasher before the water starts spraying to every corner of the there might be a spot in the dishwasher where water is spritzing before the soap got there.
We need the Starbucks patented
Yes.
soap water maker.
Yes, correct. You make a dishwasher like that, you can do dairy and meat together, and you can make a fortune. You get the right rabbi to go in with it.
Limited consumer market.
Yeah. Well,
Don't So, yeah. There was, I once had a Shabbat, spent Shabbat at a home of somebody who had it was a refrigerator oven on a timer. So you could put a chicken into the oven and it would cook it and then it would refrigerate it. Like it was the same little container. It was like on a timer, you could either refrigerate or cook. It was like lots of like space age technology, like really, really strong insulation. The company went bankrupt in 2008. And I visited them in 2013, I think, and they had not been able to get parts replaced, whatever, but that was pretty neat. So in terms of like niche markets, there are, they exist, right? Yeah. There are appliances for in Teaneck you can get houses with like, not just in Teaneck, but warming drawers. You can like built-in warming drawers for Shabbat. That makes it easier. So we use dishwashers for one gender or the other. If you want to switch it, we neutralize it, we kasher, we let it go unused for 24 hours. Then you run it once on the highest, hottest setting with soap. So it gets everything absorbed out. Make sure first you check, you clean the filter. Part of the actual food stuck there, and then you can switch it.
What do you do with powder dishes? Say if you're using...
They can be washed. They can be washed with anything. Part can be washed. Part of neutral things is really, I haven't researched this in any rigorous way, but it's interesting. Part is not a Hebrew word; it's a Yiddish word, I think, or it's not a Hebrew word. Writing in the 16th, 17th century, there are halachic sources who say, meat, eggs and fish and vegetables and things that are neither meat nor dairy, and blah, 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 which, there's no word for it, which is really interesting because it's a pretty obvious concept if you keep kosher, but there's no Hebrew word for it. Until, as late as the 16th century, so there's no Hebrew word for parv. I think because it doesn't really, as a concept, it's much less useful halakhically than we often think it. Like, parv things can, there's little to be gained by keeping a pot parv. And it's, if you cook rice in a meat pot, you can still use that rice with dairy, as long as the pot wasn't used for meat within 24 hours. So keeping your pot parv doesn't gain you all that much. If you wash, so.
So if you put a parv plate in the dishwasher with meat, and the water hits the meat, hits the parv plate, that plate doesn't become...
It would, if the actual meat hits it, it would, without soap.
Okay.
But if there is soap in, so again, put soap in there. If you accidentally put something in, it's not going to be a problem, but if you wouldn't put a parv plate in a...
Got it.
But you wouldn't really, there's no real reason, there's very little reason to have a parv plate.
Right, it wouldn't make sense.
Right.
If just a plate.
A parv cutting board can be good. You're cutting onions, you can use them for different kinds of food. That's helpful to keep your cutting boards parv, or a parv cutting board.
But you just wouldn't clean it in the dishwasher.
Yeah. Good. All right. Any questions? All right. Letter J. Waiting between meat and dairy meat. So the Talmud records a story of someone who says, my father was much more pious than I am. He would wait an entire day. Once he had meat, he wouldn't eat dairy for a full day. Whereas I only wait meal to meal. So from here we learn that between meat and dairy, you're supposed to wait from meal to meal. So what does meal to meal mean? Any possibilities? What do you think? The Talmud says you have to wait meal to meal. So what does that mean?
Breakfast to lunch.
Breakfast to lunch. So let's say a certain number of hours. Let's say 6 hours. Okay, people don't necessarily eat breakfast. People don't necessarily eat lunch. And people have 2 meals a day in Talmudic times. So meal to meal, let's say 6 hours. It's the amount of time that he's saying. Right? Any other idea? What's the other possibility?
After you make the blessing.
You say Birkat Hamazon. You say grace after meals. The meal's over. You can eat dairy now. Right? You can't eat the same meal. Right? You say Birkat Hamazon. Right? You get up from the table. All right, meal's over. Now you can go have ice cream. Okay? So Lauren's approach was adopted by the Rambam. Salon's approach was adopted by the Balei HaTosot. Basically, the Sephardic tradition and the Ashkenazi tradition. The Sephardic tradition is you have to wait a certain number of hours, 6 hours between meat and dairy. The Ashkenazi position is there's no amount of time you have to wait, you just have to make sure the meal's over. By saying Birkat Hamazon, maybe rinsing out your mouth, okay, with something, have some celery, and then you're okay. in time, things evolved somewhat, and basically the basic universal practice is to wait 6 hours, with some Ashkenazi communities waiting 3 hours, and some waiting 1 hour. But really, the 3 hours and the 1 hour seem to be an extension of the don't have to wait at all principle, but being a little bit stricter than that. Or maybe it's an application of the 6 hours in a place where people eat more meals, and maybe it's it's winter and you eat lunch, so maybe between breakfast and lunch is only 3 hours. So that's another possibility. Maybe it's maybe that's how the 3 hour custom develops. So you should do what your community does. I think many people in our community wait 3 hours. 6 is certainly the more common amount of time to wait. And I think you just know that really, like in the Ikar Adin, the essential pure halacha, at least in the Ashkenazi European, Northern European interpretation, is as long as the meal's over, it's really okay to eat dairy, because that's what this Talmudic statement seems to be saying.
You're talking only meat to dairy.
Meat to dairy.
Right?
Dairy to meat, you don't have to wait at all, just to make sure the dairy isn't in your mouth. So have a glass of water, have some celery, and then you have meat right away. So if you really, what you could do, so sometimes we have been known to have dessert first in our family, because we have a meat meal planned. We really want, the good recipe for pumpkin pie or for whatever it is dairy. With dairy pie crust, so much better, right? So have dessert first, and then everyone has a little tea or some whiskey, and then you can have your dinner afterwards, okay? And everyone's happy. You have your dairy dessert, and you have the exception is hard cheese. Hard cheese is cheese that has been aged for 6 months or more. And hard cheese, you have to wait, let's say, however long you wait from meat to dairy, you have to wait from hard cheese to meat. When I first learned about this halacha in yeshiva, I don't know, whatever, 15 years ago or more, there was you could not find aged kosher cheese. It didn't exist. It was not commercially sold. Today, thank God it is. And you can find some hard aged cheddars, there's a Parmesan cheese, there's been a real revolution in the kosher cheese market in the last 5-10 years, and you can find actual aged kosher cheeses, and if you do, you have to wait. The OU actually maintains a list of aged kosher cheeses, but usually it's a feature, right? They'll brag about it. They'll say aged for over a year, aged for 6 months, aged for 2 years, whatever. They'll say it on the label, and if you have those cheeses, you should wait before eating meat, and I'd say it's usually worth it because they're pretty good cheese. Yes.
Why is that exception carved out?
I think the understanding, the assumption is that the hard cheese are they're sharper, the flavor's stronger, they take longer to digest, and so the residue of that cheese is going to be in your system for a bit longer. Okay. Any other question about waiting from dairy to meat to dairy? Okay. One other thing about that. If you don't have the meat but just have something that is with meat, you don't have to wait. So if you use a meat stew and you pick out a potato from the meat stew and eat it, you don't have to wait before eating dairy. You can't eat that potato with dairy because that potato has absorbed meat taste. But merely eating something with meat taste, but not actual meat, does not create an obligation to wait. So if you don't want to eat meat, you don't like meat so much, but you just take a potato out of the stew, out of the shallot, whatever, you take the potatoes that were roasted with the chicken, you have the stuffing that was cooked inside the turkey, whatever, okay? You don't have to, that doesn't make you, doesn't create that obligation to wait, because it was just merely absorbed the meat taste, but doesn't actually make it with meat, unless the stuffing might be made with schmaltz. It's so if it's made with, then you have to be careful, but
What about broth?
Broth, I think, is real. Chicken broth actually contains chicken. It's more than just the flavor. Although, that is what is chicken residue, as opposed to a potato or a carrot that you take out of the chicken soup.
So the sharpness of the meat taste and
The slowness of the digestion
are independent bars.
Yeah, for that way of thinking about it. Okay, tithing and other mitzvah connected to Israel. So in the land of Israel, the Torah has many specific rules about agriculture, about how farming is done in the land of Israel. The way in which we're supposed to farm there reflects all sorts of religious values, and certain food gets to be as tithe and separated. We used to go to the Kohanim, to the priests. They would serve in the temple. They were too busy doing that. They couldn't farm, so they would get supported by this taxation system. And the Levites were educators and artists and musicians, and so they also couldn't farm, so they also had this tax system to support them, and there were special tithes that the poor would eat. That's also a sort of a social welfare tax system. So the whole rubric of mitzvot in the agricultural land of Israel to, that you can't just eat your food before various portions of your field and portions of your produce is separated and given to different people. Today we don't have, the mitzvot can't be fully observed because we don't have a temple and we can't do these mitzvot fully for one reason or another. However, the food still has to be separated. Israeli produce, you have to designate a portion of it as being for the priests. You don't give it to the priests because there aren't any who can take it for technical reasons. Therefore, you don't have to separate very much, but it does have to be separated and designated and put aside and left alone. And this has to happen before the food can be eaten. This means that produce from the land of Israel can't, vegetables, fruit, grain from the land of Israel cannot be assumed kosher unless it's supervised kosher. You can walk into a store, any apple you can buy in Chicago is kosher. That's not true if the apple is grown in Israel. It's not true for grain products, olives, fruit, vegetables. So that means if you're traveling in Israel, you should buy your fruits and vegetables at a kosher supervised produce section. Just like in America, you have kosher signs. Let's say, the CRC has that sign up in milk, so this restaurant is supervised kosher. So Israeli supermarkets will have a sign in the produce section saying all the fruits and vegetables in the store are kosher. The Truman and Meiser, the tithes are separated at the wholesale level, and so before it gets to the supermarket, it's taken care of, but you want to look for this kosher certification before buying fruits and vegetables in Israel. If you're on kibbutz and your cousin Dudu gives you a big box of grapefruit that he picked himself, those are not kosher. It's like seriously not kosher. With a very high level of prohibition until you separate the tithes. So if it's not and if you travel to Israel, you can learn how to do that yourself. You could just I don't think it's worth going through right now how to do it, but a good Israeli siddur will tell you how to do it, and if it comes up in your life, and I'm happy, very honored to walk you through and teach you how to do it. But that's what you have to do before you can eat produce from the land of Israel. Sometimes you find Israeli produce on sale here in America, and it's worth doing here too, right? Meaning, it's possible, there are various grants of leniency, maybe it's done anyway at the wholesale level, even for the produce that's bound for export, but maybe not. I've heard conflicting things. Maybe the produce that's exported doesn't require it halachically, but there are some mixed. So it's just best, just do it. Don't say a blessing because you don't know if it's necessary to separate, but you should just cut off a little piece of your pepper, do that separation of the tithes as is necessary, and again, a good siddur will tell you how to do it, and you follow the instructions of the siddur. Again, the only Israeli produce you regularly see in Chicago, I think, are peppers. It's like 1 week a year when Israeli peppers are sold here. It doesn't really happen too often, but I think it's good to buy Israeli produce. It's a nice thing to do. It's a nice opportunity to do these mitzvot and to learn about these laws, but you can't just assume that it can be eaten without doing something.
So did I understand correctly? So if I'm getting this box if I'm going to a non-kosher supermarket in Israel, and so I can, as long as I tithe it myself, then everything should be fine.
Yeah, if you're right. If you don't see a kosher, meaning the supermarket might not be a kosher supermarket. It may or may not, but the produce section may have its own. Meaning you don't have to check if the entire supermarket is kosher. And may or may not be. But look at the produce section and see what it says. And the produce section may have a kosher symbol. I think most of the big supermarkets have some sort of kosher supervision in the community that the supermarket's not aware of in Israel. But again, you can always take the Truman and Meiser after the fact.
And what about if you buy from Palestinians?
Then it's not necessary. If it's actually from their own farms, then you don't have to. Then. So the truth is that's a machloka, that's a dispute halachically. But generally, we say that it does not require any of the tithes to be taken. So that's also safe.
Is it like anywhere in the modern state of Israel versus?
That's a good question. That's a very good question. Like the halachic definition of the land of Israel for purposes of these mitzvahs, how is that determined? And the practice to be strict and to include any place within the sovereign state of Israel or Israeli controlled territory, even though there are regions in Israel that are outside the historic border, like the Negev or the Golan, which is, let's say, especially the Negev is clearly, undeniably outside the historic borders of the land of Israel, but it's under Israeli sovereignty, and it's pretty easy to do. We separate tiles even from those like high-tech, aquaponic, whatever, farms in the Arava, we do it, yeah, sure. It's a good question. Okay, so other produce issues, letter L. Insects. Okay, insects are not kosher. Insects are not kosher because they're creepy crawlies, right? The Torah prohibits eating insects, and insect infestation of fruits and vegetables is somewhat common. So you have to make sure your fruits and vegetables are free of insect infestation. Now, we had a rule. We said that things are nullified in 60 times their volume. So what should be the problem? You have a little worm in your cabbage. The cabbage is hundreds of times larger than the little worm, so it really should be fine. Except the rule that things are nullified in 60 times their volume doesn't apply to intact organisms. So if you have the worm, even though the cabbage is 60 times its volume, that worm is not going to be nullified. It remains unkosher, and it has to be removed from the vegetable before it's cooked or eaten. Sorry. Oh, you may say, but everything is filled with microorganisms and tons of invisible little creepy crawlies. So we say that things that are too small to be seen don't count in Jewish law, right? Jewish law prohibits things that are visible and discernible with the naked eye. So there's some gray areas or some things which are, you don't need a microscope to see, you don't need a magnifying glass to see, but it's very, very hard to see them unless you're looking very carefully. So generally we're strict about those types of little bugs. And so it's important to have some regimen for checking and removing insects from fruits and vegetables. Generally what I recommend is soaking it in water, adding some vinegar to the water, which kind of like stuns them and like makes it less easy for them to grasp onto whatever they're grasping onto, and then vigorously rinsing in like a colander before eating fruits, depending on you also do it to a cantaloupe, right? But to lettuce or cabbage or greens or things like that, that's what soak it in water with vinegar and then rinse vigorously in a colander, and then check the water. Like if you see sometimes you'll see little flies, floating in the water. So that means do it a second time and make sure do it until the water is clean, or until you don't see insects in the water. It really depends on the season and the location, and sometimes the pest management is very rigorous, and you won't find anything, and sometimes you'll find you rinse and you rinse and you rinse and you keep finding little insects. From my experience, it's not often that happens, but it does happen sometimes, and these are serious prohibitions to eat insects, again, because it's a prohibited type of food, type of animal, and it's not nullified because it's an intact organism. Now, if it's chopped up and blended or whatever, that the insects themselves are no longer intact, then they are nullified in 60. So part of the normal preparation of the thing you want to cook is to blend something, so that makes it much more lenient, right? Because the blending is going to blend the insects also, and once they're no longer intact, then they're nullified in 60 like anything else. Question on insects? Letter 2, number 2, Orla. First 3 years of a fruit tree, the fruit is forbidden. So if you plant a fruit tree, you've got to be careful for that. We're not really concerned about it for stuff that grows because it's such an unlikely situation to be in the source of food. Kilayim, you can't plant mixed species of fruits of certain plants together. Again, it's not an issue for a consumer. If you're a farmer, you should learn how to plant your vegetables in such a way that you don't violate this. Yashan, number 4. The Torah prohibits eating grain that's new. You have to wait until the second day of Passover to eat grain that was grown that year. Right. So you keep it and you store it, and then after the second day of Passover, then you can eat it again. So obviously it's still Passover, you can't eat it, unless it's kosher Pesach. But even after Passover, you can't eat. Right. Well, grain that would grow, that starts growing after Passover, let's say in the summer, you couldn't, even after you harvest it, you have to wait several months until Passover comes along again so you can eat that grain. Okay? This prohibition is called chadash. You can't eat new grain. You have to wait until Passover comes before that grain can be eaten. This is managed very effectively in Israel by keeping all the grain in big warehouses before it enters the food system. In outside the land of Israel, the custom has developed to be very lenient about this prohibition and to assume that it doesn't apply outside the land of Israel. This is, and even if it does, maybe the grain that's in the particular food supply, this food item that I want to eat, maybe it's old grain anyway. And the truth is, the grain in America used to be old until Nixon sold off the grain reserve to the Russians. And they sold it back to us when the prices went up. They had a quick buck. But before, the federal government used to keep a grain reserve. From the time of President Roosevelt, they used to, and prices of grain dropped too low, the federal government would buy lots of grain, have massive granaries, and if the price of wheat went up, the federal government would sell. In this way, there was support for farmers to keep the price from dropping too low, so farmers could have a guaranteed income, and there was support for consumers to keep the price from going too high. This was the federal farm support system from President Roosevelt until President Nixon. President Nixon sold off the grain supply and instead guaranteed farmers a price per ton on their grain and just mailed checks to the farmers to make up the difference between the market value and the guaranteed price that the farmers receive. This had the effect of incentivizing farmers to grow as much as they possibly could because they're guaranteed $5 or whatever, $30 a ton, whatever it is, X dollars per ton. And it also meant the actual market price of grain is very low. So this is when you started having, corn syrup being used as a sweetener in America. This is when you had animals moving from the fields to indoors where they're fed corn, and because corn is so cheap as a raw ingredient because it's subsidized in this way. So all sorts of implications of this move, a lot of probably unintended consequences. One of them is we no longer have a granary, so you have new grain in the food supply, in your Cheerios, in your bread flour, possibly violating this prohibition. And those who are strict are careful about what flour they use. You can put the UPC code from your Cheerio box into a website, and it'll tell you if it's a problem with Chadash or not, if there's prohibition or not, if you want to be careful about that. There are bakeries that are certified as Yashan, or Yashan it says, which means only using old flour. It'll say that on the label of certain kosher bakeries, for those who want to be strict about this. But the majority of us are not strict about this based on an ancient tradition that we don't have to be so concerned about this outside of Israel in the diaspora, because maybe it's really old anyway, because it comes from someplace else, and who knows, and maybe this prohibition doesn't apply outside of Israel. And so for these reasons, the common practice is leaving it outside of Israel. And in Israel, they just keep any local grain, which is not that much. Maybe it's used for pasta, or whatever it's used for baking. The government sort of has a system in place to delay its entry into the market. Number 5, challah. Challah, there's a mitzvah to tie the dough. In ancient times, a little piece, every time you baked bread, you made dough, a little piece of that dough was separated and given to a priest. Again, the priests are busy in the temple, they don't have time to farm or bake, so you would give them a little piece of your dough. Today we don't have priests who are capable of accepting that dough and eating it, so instead we separate a little piece and burn it as we bake our bread. Okay, so you make your loaf of bread, or you separate your dough, you make your loaf, and then you put a little ball of dough in your baking pan with, let's say, your big loaf, and it just kind of burns up as you cook it, and it's described. This is called separating challah. Challah, we call challah like the Shabbat bread, but really the word challah in classically, it's, literally means the separation of this amount of dough as part of this tithe, which again can't be given today, but is still separated and then burned again. So it's like a vestigial memory of this more intact system that we used to be able to perform. there are some who attach great spiritual power to this mitzvah, that it, if particularly women who are more likely, let's say in our community right now, to be baking bread, and so sometimes there'll be like somebody is sick or somebody is, struggling with infertility or with whatever it might be. So I'll get, I want, my friend, please, when you separate challah, when you perform this mitzvah this Friday as you get ready for Shabbat, please keep me in mind, or please pray for my grandfather, or whatever it might be. And you'll see people will do that. I think you can pray for somebody without, attaching it to this mitzvah, but it is something that you'll see. When we last lived in Israel, Sarah was pregnant with the twins. She was one day walking down the street past a pizza place of a baker, like the proprietor, ran out to the street and called her into the store to be the one to separate the challah from the big batch of pizza dough. And thought it'd be a good omen for the kids, that she would do this mitzvah, but somebody who could say the bracha, a religious Jew who could perform this mitzvah. It can't be done by a child, right? That's also, if you're baking dough in a nursery school and everyone's, a child can't, you want to teach the child to do the mitzvah, but a child can't do this mitzvah on behalf of an adult who's going to eat that bread, because this would have to be done by Jewish adults in order to really count. So it's also something to keep in mind. And then I guess the last, can I finish 10? Okay, we'll finish this up in the next 10 minutes. Shemitah, 6, the sabbatical year. Every 7 years, the Torah tells us we let our fields lie fallow, we don't farm in certain ways, and all the land becomes ownerless. It's like a Sabbath of the land every 7 years. This, again, is only practiced in the land of Israel. So in modern times, it's a huge headache, because if you can't farm, how do you eat? And are there workarounds, are there leniencies, and how do they apply? I would just say, if you find yourself in Israel during a sabbatical year, it's something you're going to have to research and read about. If you're not in Israel, unfortunately, we don't get to fulfill this mitzvah or relate to it in any way. So I don't think I'm going to say much about it now. Just again, the Torah prohibits certain agricultural labors, and also prohibits acts of ownership over the produce that grows on its own in the fields. So very, very complicated mechanisms are created to get food for people during the sabbatical year, including importing it, including using Palestinian farmers, including growing it in hydroponic factories where it's not touching the ground, including a sale of the land to a non-Jewish farmer for the duration of that year, including having representatives of the rabbinic Beit Din go and harvest things that grow on their own, so rather than the farmer taking possession of it themselves and then selling it without any profit markup, just to reimburse them for their labor, but not in an ownership kind of way. And all of these systems are in competition, and it's fun and chaotic. And if you're fortunate enough to find yourself in Israel during a Shemitah year, we should research this, and you can read up on it. And it's a vast area of halakha. I don't think we need to concern ourselves with it right now, because unfortunately we don't have much access to this mitzvah here in the diaspora.
Do you know when the next one is?
Let's see. The last one was, I think, 2 years ago. This is year 2 of the Shemitah cycle, if I'm not mistaken. I may be mistaken, but so that's what we're talking about when it's coming. So, okay, M. Tfilat Kalim. So just like somebody who converts to Judaism, the final step of the conversion process is to immerse fully in a mikveh, in the ritual bath, without any barriers, and immerse in the mikveh as a Jew. So too, our pots and pans and forks and knives go through a sort of similar process when they get incorporated into a Jewish kitchen. Because keeping kosher and eating kosher food that was prepared in exclusively kosher kitchens is so important to our way of life and the way we feed ourselves and feed our family and our friends. So any food utensil that has been made by someone who isn't Jewish has to also go through a similar conversion process before, quote-unquote conversion process, before it can be used in a kosher kitchen. This is different from making them kosher, right? Making them kosher is they've been used for some non-kosher food and they've absorbed some taste, and you have to purge that non-kosher taste from the fork by putting in boiling water or whatever it may be for that particular item. This has never been used before, but it's been made by someone not Jewish. We're going to use it in our Jewish home, so it has to be brought to a mikveh. For convenience sake, there are some mikvahs that are called kalim mikvahs, mikvahs specifically for utensils rather than people, and they're just a little bit smaller. And they're actually, the rules are the same. The mikvah that you use for a fork, it's the same mikvah that a person can go into. It has a minimal size, but it's going to be just the minimal size. Maybe it's not going to be beautiful tile. It's not going to be heated. It's going to be much more rudimentary and pragmatic. We have one here off the side of our mikvah. The people mikvah, the entrance is off of the parking lot. In theory, it's in use right now, so I'm not going to take you. It could be in use right now, so I'm not going to take you to show you. It's not going to preserve the privacy of people who use it. We don't go there at night. But that's the entrances from the back of the parking lot. And then we have a side entrance from the driveway, which brings you into a adjoining area of the mikvah complex, which is just for bringing your forks and knives and pots and pans and things like that. Things that are made of metal need to be brought to a mikvah. Things that are made of glass should be brought to the mikvah. We don't see the blessing, we don't see the mikvah bracha, because it's unclear. Glass, I think I mentioned the other, glass was like the great mystery substance of the Talmud. The Torah talks about metal, the Torah talks about earthenware, and glass is like both. It's made from sand, and it shatters if you break it, sort of like earthenware, but you can melt it down, sort of like metal. So they didn't know. Glass was like the microwave of the ancient world. Okay, they didn't know what to do with it. So glass we bring to the mikvah, we just don't say a blessing. Fine china, there are lenient opinions. Rabbi Feinstein was lenient about fine china, so I think glaze. Any glazing earthenware does not have to be brought to a mikvah, but whereas more unglazed earthenware does have to be brought to a mikvah. So as you buy new things, you bring them to the mikvah. Our mikvah here is open anytime during the day, so if it's a Sunday morning or whatever, but again, not at night because we want to, it's like adjacent to the person mikvah, so we don't want to have like a woman who's going to immerse herself in the mikvah and to hear just on the other side of the wall, somebody banging their pots, and it's like a little bit, just it could be a little bit unnerving or distracting. Finally, what does it rely?
So what is the consequence if you don't do that? You buy new utensils, but you don't do it.
So it's an obligation that you haven't fulfilled. The food is still kosher, most people say, but it's an obligation that you haven't fulfilled. So it's an obligation. So if you haven't done it, do it now. Right? Do it. I don't think it expires. I think even if you miss the chance to do it right when you buy it, you can do it now.
What constitutes like made by a Jewish?
Excellent question. Excellent question. What is made in a factory, right? Is there any person, right? What if no human hand touches the pot,
And it's
right?
like a Jewish brand.
Oh, yeah. What if it's owned by? What if it's a Jewish shareholder of a? Who knows? Right. Very good question, and no simple answer. And some are lenient. I think, or that's like a throw it into the mix for grounds for leniency. We bring stuff to the Kalim anyway, but that's a good. It's a very good question, and I don't have to like. I was hoping someone would say that. Good job. Okay. Sometimes some things, years, the consumer himself, like if you open a can of soda, so now you have the can, the aluminum can is now a vessel that you can use to pour liquid in, contain liquid and pour it out. Before it wasn't. So maybe it has to go to the mikvah. It doesn't because you're the one who opened it, right? The person who opened it, right? So I guess you probably shouldn't drink from a soda can that some non-Jewish opened for you. Then they're the ones who make it into a kli. They make it into a vessel by opening it. On the other hand, it's disposable, so maybe it doesn't count anywhere if it's disposable.
It's kind of true of plates that you get that are full of styrofoam in the box. They're not edible.
Yeah, you're just brushing out. That's the difference in this. But when you open a can, you're actually puncturing a thin piece of aluminum at the opening, which is different from opening a box and taking a plate from a box. I don't think that's completing anything. But I think I think disposable things don't need to go to the mikvah. So you use it once, then it wouldn't matter. And if you decide to use it twice, your decision to use it twice might be what makes it into that reusable vessel, and so you're the one who makes it, not the original manufacturer. Plastic does not need to, and rubber does not need to go to the mikvah. If you have toaster, things that are parts of, if you can, if they're detachable parts of toaster ovens or whatever, you can bring them to the mikvah, but only if they can be, you don't have to immerse your entire toaster. Or waffle iron or whatever. Reliable hechsher, this will pause for that, there are products that are manufactured, modern industrial food is very complicated, and making industrial food is very complicated. And so that's given rise to an industry of kosher certification, because you need people who have sophisticated knowledge of how the industrial food system works, and also sophisticated knowledge of the laws of kashrut. So that's what a real, quote unquote, reliable hechsher, reliable kosher symbol signifies, that the organization both has enough knowledge of laws of kosher and has enough knowledge of industrial food to actually certify, and they have the competence to actually set up, they might know a lot but be incompetent, right, and not actually set up a system of inspection that's adequate. Or they might just be scoundrels and they're scamming, all those are, right, those are lots of things that could go wrong. So what could go wrong is they could be totally honest and a lot of integrity, but be mavericks in their Jewish law principles. I can think of one kosher certification agency where that's the case. Honest people, lots of integrity, but they have a few maverick positions that are outside of what the mainstream has coalesced around, and so they're on our non-recommended list for our kosher. Others, it's incompetence. They claim to supervise, let's say, restaurants all across, a vast region. They only have 3 inspectors. They're not providing adequate supervision, and some, I think, are scoundrels who are just not honest people and just should not be reliable for that reason as well. So, our community, this shul takes a very, very liberal, generous attitude towards what counts as reliable. We tend to give them the benefit of the doubt. The ones that aren't on that list, there's something a little fishy about their operation. There's some maverick position they adopt, or something, some reason why they're on our non-recommended list. This is for those processed foods or restaurants that require some sort of supervision. For unprocessed foods, they might require no supervision. It wouldn't matter. Okay, we got through kosher. Next time we'll start with Roman numeral 5, 5. And the next class is going to be, let's just decide now. Hang on. This, I think, I went to December 11th, that's December 11th at 7? Is that okay for you all?
Mm-hmm.
I can't come, but
Well, if there's anyone.
Yeah, that question you asked about what counts as a meal,
Yeah.
that's a good question, right?
crushing.
All right, thank you all for coming. Okay, it's in my calendar.
So would we done?